Okay, morning folks. Thanks for getting up so early on a Saturday morning with me. It's freezing cold up here in Brisbane this morning, so I struggled to convince myself to get out of bed. I'm glad you guys came and joined me, so I didn't get up early. Stopped myself. Not that it's very early, but anyway. What we're going to do today is go through some of the changes in the 1.34, which is the new version of RadarOpus that's just been released. A big development in the version 134 is the release of the Vithoulkas expert system, or the module that you can use to analyse cases using the Vithoulkas method. So we're going to devote most of our time today to going through that. So if you're working on the program on your computer, can I get you just to have a look at your program? And across the top, I'm on the Mac today, so on mine it's in the middle here. If you're on PC, it'll be towards the left-hand side. It will say the current version of the program you've got. Just double check that says RadarOpus 1.34. It'll have build 10 in brackets behind it. That part doesn't matter so much, but just make sure it says 134. If you've got 133 or earlier, you're not going to have the Vithoulkas expert system there, so you won't see most of the features that we're using today. If you want to get into them, just download. You can use the live update, which will prompt you automatically to download the update to the latest version, or if you go to the archibald.com website, you can also manually download the update files from there. But we're going to focus on what's unique and new in the 134 today, so just double check for me you've got that version on your computer. So if we go through the Vithoulkas expert system, it's a really interesting module, and it's a fantastically useful module. For me, it's something that I really used every day in my practice. For as long as I've been working with radar, so 10 years now. I find it incredibly useful and very exciting that we've now got this released back into RadarOpus again with some new improvements and extended features that weren't present in the Vithoulkas module when we were in the old radar programs. So the focus of the Vithoulkas module is to help you in analysing cases to identify which medicines are really most characteristic for the collection of symptoms that you've gathered. That sounds a bit of a funny thing to say, because that's what homeopathy is all about. But the goal here is, I guess, to do some really mathematical tricks to assist you to compensate for the way our information is presented in our repertories. Of course, the big limitation with repertories is that not all medicines are equal. We've got some medicines like sulfur, which is in 20,000 or more than that rubrics now. Other medicines like Vithoulkas, maybe it's in 1,500 or so. So of course, whenever we repertorize, we're always going to get the better known and bigger medicines, or at least more likely to come up highly in our repertorization. What was developed in the Vithoulkas expert system is applying George Vithoulkas' way of analysing cases, doing it in a way that assists you to work with the repertory and to improve your mathematical chances of getting a really well indicated and useful medicine come up very highly in your analysis. Which means not just it's going to help you when there's one of the well-known medicines that are indicated and make it easier for you to recognise that as an indicated medicine, but also going to help you when very unknown medicines are indicated. I always remember I have one really striking example that really sticks in my head. I had a young boy come into my clinic who'd been having homeopathy treatment previously, had homeopaths in the family, and had this really kind of a terrible story where a very well-meaning primary school took all the kids for an excursion to the farm, and unfortunately I wouldn't quite realise that was the day that they were dredging the dam and essentially killing off all the unwanted species. So this little group of 6-year-olds were there watching hundreds and hundreds of fish fighting to death on the shore next to this dam, which was really traumatic for the little Tucker. So it started all this kind of extreme militant veganism and arguing with friends and family and stomach problems and headaches, and he was really kind of stressed, little boy. And he'd had I think carcinosin before, and it had phosphorus and nitrite causticum and all these kind of sympathy for animals and looking after other folks kind of medicines that fitted his fairly vague physical symptoms as best I could see, and not much happened, almost nothing happened, which is pretty disappointing. And I used the Vithoulkas expert system, and it popped up a medicine that I'd never heard of before at the time, which was Nufa luteum. It's a water lily, yellow water lily. And the really interesting thing when I looked at my analysis is that medicine was only in one of the dozen or so rubrics that I used. It was only in first grade, and it was a fairly large rubric. I think it was the Sympathy for Animals rubric that it was in. But what the Vithoulkas expert system did is it looked at my analysis and really told me the same thing I knew already, that most of my symptoms were uncharacteristic and fairly useless. And there was one medicine that stood out unusually in that group, and of course it's one that would never come up in a traditional flat repetrization. You know, no repetrization with a dozen or so symptoms is going to pop out Vithoulkas because it's in almost no rubrics in the repertory. It's very, very small. But when I went and read the Materia Medica, I saw all this stuff about it being a medicine for people who are traumatized by seeing the suffering of animals. Really very specific to what was happening in that case, and a really useful medicine for that little guy. And that's kind of an example of what we hope to get out of the Vithoulkas expert system, that it really does help draw your attention to those lesser known medicines by applying rules of what homeopathy as characteristic, and in particular what George Vithoulkas sees as characteristic. So it very intelligently looks at the rubrics that you've chosen and looks at the medicines that are there, the grade of the medicines in those rubrics, the size of those rubrics, also the size of that medicine in the repertory in general, how well known, how little known it is, and how characteristic the symptoms you've chosen are for that specific medicine, and then it can give you recommendations based on how that medicine fits in the overall Materia Medica. It's really useful, I think, because for someone who's been around for a long time, it's going to pop up medicines that you've not used before, and for someone who's fairly new to homeopathic prescribing, it's also going to give you that, I guess, kind of weight of clinical experience where it starts to give you recommendations. When someone who knows a bit more Materia Medica straight away think, oh, this medicine's very well known in that area. Other of us don't know that yet. So it applies that thinking. It also looks at, have you got enough modalities? Have you got concomitants? What's the causation symptom? And factors all that into account. So let's have a little look at how to use it. The thing I really like with the Vithoulkas expert system is essentially you work in the exact same way that you do with any other case. You don't need to change things very much. Oh, sorry guys, someone's saying I'm fading in and out. Okay, let me just try something. You guys just stick. Okay, is that any better? Good. I'm just going to talk for a second, guys. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks, guys. So let's have a look at how to use the Vithoulkas expert system. The thing that I really like with it is that it really doesn't require you to work very differently than what you regularly do work. The method of working is essentially the same as what we do with any other case. You find the rubrics that you're interested in, and you pop them in your clipboard, and then you do your analysis. We can do some extra bits with that, but basically it works exactly the same as you would with any repetrization strategy that you're using. So the thing that's, I guess, really useful about that is you can actually use the Vithoulkas expert system with any analysis method that you're using. You don't need to change things or do things in a different way than what you ordinarily would do. Or if you've got an unusual way of working, then you can just click the Vithoulkas expert system and do that as a second analysis over the top of that. So let's go through and pop a couple of rubrics in the clipboard. I'm just going to pick a fairly random, and we'll see what comes up. It'll be interesting to see what comes through from this. So I've got my repertory here and open. The Vithoulkas expert system is designed to work with synthesis repertory. You actually see in the list of repertory views across the top here, you can see there's this variety of different views or settings for the repertory, which essentially presents different information depending on the quality or the source of the information and where it's come from. So you can work with the full repertory, which is the very top one, which shows all information from every author, right from the very classical, very conservative, through to modern and experimental things that have been derived from family speculation, things that have come from clinical practice, and everything in between. And then there's a whole series of levels going backwards from there. We can go down to example to the Millennium view, which is more modern information, but with the more speculative stuff taken out. So it has new provings, for example, but it wouldn't have something that Scholten has added based on family analysis that doesn't have any clinical confirmation as yet. We can step back to the quantum method, which is quite a conservative analysis. It's focused on information that's classically sourced and also has clinical confirmation. And then there's a series of points back here, really different information historically. We've got up to the era of Schmidt, through Kent, Hahnemann's era. You can just look at information from Boger, Bonninghausen, just the information that was in Kent's repertory, etc. And you'll see there's two views in here that are related to Vithoulkas. There's the Vithoulkas view, and this is probably the primary one, and this is the one that George created, where he's essentially gone through the entire repertory. He's obviously had a couple of years to spare. He's gone through the entire repertory, each rubric, and marked them according to the quality of information seen homeopathically, which means that if we've got a rubric like anxiety, with, I'm guessing probably 700 medicines or something in it, so that there's nothing very characteristic there. There's nothing very useful that's going to help you narrow the case down. He's marked this as being of little value or lesser importance. Where if you've got a rubric that's highly characteristic, highly specific, he's marked that as having more importance. He's marked the rubrics with modalities as having more importance compared to locations, for example. And we've gone through the entire repertory, and so it's all tagged according to the quality of the information, but also it's modified in terms of what information presents itself. George has gone through and said, these are the authors that I find reliable and useful, that I would trust with my way of wanting to work in homeopathy, and he's excluded all the others. So you'll find if you change a repertory to the Vithoulkas view, quite a bit of information will go away from the repertory, and that's all the things that George, with a more conservative orientation, said these are things I don't want to account for in my analysis. These are either medicines that I think had a too speculative kind of proving, or not a sufficiently detailed or sufficiently careful proving. These are authors whose work I'm not a huge fan of. So he's quite discriminatory in going through this list and saying, right, this is what I find useful and valuable, and let's leave that one in. And this is what I find less useful and less valuable, and so we'll leave that one out. With the real focus of developing a view of the repertory that represents his understanding philosophically of how we should analyse cases, but also represents the type of information that he finds valuable, the type of author, the type of homeopathy that he finds valuable. So that's the primary view for using the Vithoulkas expert system, and I know a lot of people work with that view just as their day-to-day repertory as well. There is also the second one here, Kent and Vithoulkas, where this is all the information that was in Kent's repertory, plus George's own personal additions to the repertory. So this is a smaller, it's even more conservative again, because it doesn't have other authors there, it just has Kent and Vithoulkas, where the Vithoulkas view has Kent and Vithoulkas and many, many other authors that George has assessed and said, yes, I'm happy with the quality of information they present. So you don't need to change your view before you use the Vithoulkas expert system. You can stick with whatever one you ordinarily use. Once you launch the expert system, it will actually automatically adjust and start using George's information, or at least prompt you, ask you to confirm the view that you'd like to be using. But of course, if you want to change that view, we can just click it. Say here, Vithoulkas view, click it, and it will change that view. It will adjust my repertory. On this particular page, you see very small difference because these rubrics are all authors that George approves of. So I might go back to the full repertory just so I can give you some examples later on. So let's go through now. I'm just going to pop a few rubrics in my clipboard, and again, this is a fairly random selection just out of curiosity to see what will come up. So as with any other case, you can either just start typing with our clipboard. In George's method, he likes to have a mix of mentals, generals, physical particulars, very Kentian style analysis. So I'm going to go to, say, Fear of the Dark. Seems a good rubric. So with my keyboard, I can just start typing letter M, letter I, pick the mind chapter, so I'll click enter. I'm going to go down to the fear section, so I'll type F-E-A-R, enter. And we'll go to dark, D-A-R-K. I'll scroll down to that and click enter. And I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to click enter again to go to the repertory. And so here's my rubric, Mind, Fear, Dark of. And you can see, we all know that's a pretty big rubric, 104 medicines that are in it. So in a lot of analyses, this may not help you, as much as you'd like it to, because it's actually quite a big rubric. We'll pop this one in anyway and see how the Vithoulkas system helps with that. So I'm just going to use my mouse, and I'll just go to where this word dark is, and I'm going to drag and drop that with my mouse, pick it up and pop it into my clipboard. So just see the little one come up underneath showing me I've got that rubric. Yeah, so that's the simple way of browsing around. Of course, if you're a mouse person, let's get another mental symptom. Let's see some anxieties. So I'll click on the binoculars to bring up my list of chapters. I'm going to click on the mind chapter. I'll get some anxiety, and I'll click on that. And let's say it's anxiety in the morning. So I'll just start typing the word morning. Here it is. Okay, click enter, enter. There's my rubric. And I can drag and drop that into my clipboard. Or the other way you can take a rubric, or one of the other ways, is just at the top here you've got this clipboard with a little arrow on it, which is a take button. And this button takes your rubrics and pops them into your clipboard, and will pop them in clipboard number 1 by default as the default clipboard. So if I could just click that, and that will drag my rubric over and drop it in automatically. But the other thing I want to show you, which is really useful with working with the expert system, is if I click just to the right of that, there's a little drop-down arrow. When I click that drop-down arrow, you can see there's these take intensities, intensity 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is assigning weighting to those rubrics. This is saying how important they are in your case, and the Vithoulkas system actually works very strongly with that. It's actually quite important to his analysis method that you use some weighting in your analysis. So I'm just going to launch the help file for the Vithoulkas expert system quickly so I can show you the text for the meaning that he assigns to each of these weightings, because we recommend that you use his system, of course, because that's what the formula of the module is designed to use. Okay. So what you see on the screen just to the right-hand side at the moment, this is the help section from the Vithoulkas expert system. And this is where we can see the recommendations for what kind of rubrics he suggests to include. So he says an intensity 1, a standard rubric, just dragged and dropped, popped in the clipboard, or assigned to intensity 1, should be for a symptom that's clearly present. So it's a symptom that's definitely there. There's no space in his analysis method for rubrics that kind of a bit of a maybe rubric. Intensity 2 is a symptom that's very frequent or very intense. So it either happens very often, or when it does happen, it happens very strongly. Intensity 3 is for a symptom that's very frequent and also very intense. So something that's happening very often and also happening very strongly. And intensity 4 is for symptoms that are very, very frequent and, of course, also intense. So there's this kind of sliding scale as to how dominant, frequent, strong, often the symptoms are in the case. And so the Vithoulkas analysis works best when you're using this sliding scale. You don't need to use it. You can put all the rubrics in standard intensity 1, just as you always do if you work that way. Though you will find often the expert system will get to the end and suggest things to you, like maybe you want to change the underlining and change the intensity to indicate which are the really stronger symptoms in the case and which are the less strong. It's interesting when you think about it, because what we're typically taught when we learn repertorization is that you don't want to put all the symptoms of the case into your analysis. You want to focus on just what's highly characteristic. The difference with the Vithoulkas expert system is you can actually put many more rubrics in your analysis, because even though you're getting more and more rubrics, and maybe they're getting bigger and bigger, when the expert system analyzes that case, it compensates for that, and so it clears out all those kind of garbage symptoms, takes the weight or the emphasis off them, and moves the emphasis back to what's characteristic. And it does that by considering what George has assigned as characteristic style of rubrics, characteristic medicines in particular rubrics, but also by looking at these intensities. So if you want to put a whole lot of great big enormous physical general rubrics into your case, that's actually okay to do that, because the module will compensate and take a lot of the weighting off for those when it does the analysis. It considers these kind of things and factors it in mathematically to the results of your analysis. So just scroll down a little bit. What they do recommend is that not more than 80% of the symptoms should have an intensity of 1, so standard intensity. Not more than 80% again should have an intensity of 2. So you want the majority of your symptoms in the case to be intensity 1 or 2, which is symptoms that are either clearly present or symptoms that are very frequent or very intense, which is probably what most people complain of. you want to have not more than 50% of symptoms with an intensity 3. Probably it's unusual to see someone who's got more than 50% of their case symptoms that are very frequent and very intense. Intensity 4, not more than 20%. And so again, like anything, the things that are really highly characteristic are more specifically represented. The things that are a bit more general, more occasionally, they can be more dominantly represented with more and more rubrics. So that's the general maths formula that Vithoulkas recommends you use. If you're outside of that, it's okay. The module will compensate for that and factor that into its analysis. But you get the best results if you work with this method. So most of your symptoms, intensity 1, which will be symptoms that are clearly present. But when you've got people who've got those very frequent, very, very intense, then you want to mark them as higher intensity 2s, 3s, or 4s, depending on how they fit in. So I'm just going to close that help down. I'll go back to my repertory. So I'll pop this in my clipboard now, and so I'm going to decide to assign it intensity 2. It's a symptom that is either very frequent or very intense. So a way I can do that is just clicking that drop-down arrow to the right, and I'll click on where it says take with intensity 2. Just click there, and so you can see this little number 2 has appeared below my clipboard, saying there's now 2 rubrics in that clipboard. And if I bring up my analysis, you can see next to that rubric, mind anxiety in the morning, there's a little 2 here saying it's been given an intensity of 2. Okay, I'll just move this table of contents out of the way so we've got the full screen. That's better. Okay, and I'll close that down now. So let's grab a couple more rubrics. So I might pick one more, mind one. Let's say mind, anger, children. Okay, and I'll give that intensity 1. If we get some generals, I'll go to the generals chapter, just typed in the GEN and clicked enter. I'll go to the food and drink section, FOOD, enter. Let's pick salt, SALT, enter, desire. And I'll say that's just a sometimes symptom, so I'll take it with intensity 1. But if I'm going to go back to chocolate, and I'll say they crave lots and lots of chocolate all the time because everyone knows it's my favourite symptom to have. So I'm going to go back to food and drink section just by clicking here where it says food and drinks with my mouse. Just across the top here, this is actually also active, and you can use this for navigation. So anywhere in this pathway you click will take you back to the navigational window at that level. So if I click on where it says food and drinks, it brings me back into generals in the food and drink section in my navigation window. So I'm going to go to chocolate, and I'll say desire. I'll go into my repertory, and that symptom says very frequent and very intense, so I'll give that a grading of 3. So I can just click my drop-down arrow and take with a 3. So I just want to point out quickly to you, you can see next to where it says take intensity 3, it says a little plus symbol and the number 3. So this is actually a keyboard command for taking a rubric. The other way you can do it if you don't want to be a mouse person and drag and drop or click here is you could just use a keyboard command. So if I do that on this example now, so I'm just going to move out of here and cancel that. So what I can do on my keyboard is type the plus symbol. So on most Australian keyboards you need to type shift and then that button because it's on the same button as the equals. So do shift plus. Up comes my take a rubric window, and I'll just type the number 3. So I did a plus 3, and then I'll click enter. And you can see that's popped that 5th rubric in my clipboard there. So we'll do that again with another rubric. Let's go for a physical particular and say extremities, pain in the morning. So I'm going to say this is only a sometimes symptom, so I'll put it in with intensity 1. So again, I'll type the plus, shift plus on my keyboard. Up comes my quick command window. I'll put in a number 1 for intensity 1. That's also the default, so you don't even need to type the 1 if you don't want to here. And I'll just click enter, and that's popped that's that 6th rubric in my clipboard now. We might pick one more. I know he's going to want me to have a modality, so let's go to extremities again. Let's do pain. I think we did morning already, didn't we? So let's do something from cold. Air aggravates. Okay. And we'll say that's intensity 2. Every time there's cold air, there's a definite aggravation. So I did a shift plus, just typed in the number 2, and then I click enter. So I've got my 7 rubrics in my analysis here. So I'm just going to click on that clipboard, bring up my standard analysis. So here it is. We can see sepia, phosphorus, arsenicum, lycopodium, sulfur, arginate, etc. Pretty kind of common polycrest type medicines. I've got a reasonable mix of rubrics. I've got some bigger rubrics, some smaller rubrics. There's decent information there. Nothing stands out as especially exciting, but of course I've picked a generic pretend case, so maybe it won't. But from here what we want to do is launch the Vithoulkas expert system and see how the module analyzes and understands this case. So that's a really simple thing to do, exactly the same as launching a regular analysis. You can go to the analysis button up the top of your program, and just in the little drop down you can see here's the Vithoulkas expert system. You could also bring this up with the keyboard command Shift and F9 if you want to work with the keyboard commands. So I'll just click where it says Vithoulkas expert system. So this launches the Vithoulkas expert system. So in the layout here you can see there's a range of different information presented. Across the top we have of course a picture of George, and there's a link here. If you click on where it says Vithoulkas expert system, it will open up a link and take you to his website. Some really interesting stuff there, recorded lectures of his, some materia medica and things he's posted, some interesting stuff to have a look through. But then below this he gives specific information based on the case that I've analysed. So we can see here, the first thing he says is please add modalities and other symptoms. So he doesn't think I've got really a broad enough selection of symptoms here. He's actually encouraging me to use more rubrics, which is maybe a bit unusual. It's more often for us to want to use less rubrics and just focus on what's characteristic. But the way the Vithoulkas expert system works, it can compensate for all that stuff in its mathematical formula. So it's actually happier when you pick a rubric for every symptom in the case rather than just focusing on what is particularly characteristic. You can use the intensity and the inbuilt maths in the module to compensate for that. So I could go back now and go through my case notes and sort of see, is there any other symptoms I want to represent? Are there any modalities that should be included? Maybe I need to ask my client some more questions. He often gives quite specific advice here and say, in this case that you've done, this is a specific thing I want you to go back and ask some more about. You can see below this he starts to suggest some medicines you could look at. So he says also ask questions about. So it hasn't really determined what medicine it's suggesting. It's saying I haven't picked enough characteristic symptoms yet, but based on what's here so far I could consider lycopodium, carcinosin, Staph aureus, phosphorus, sepia, tarantula, arsenicum, sulfur, tuberculinum. So that's quite interesting because if we go back to the analysis, so we can see a lot of these medicines aren't particularly highly represented, and he's moved them higher up the list. Carcinosin, for example, is down here as medicine number 14, where he moved it up to quite high in the list. Was it number 1 or number 2? Tuberculinum, it's low down the list, he bumped it up a little bit. So some of these medicines he's excluded. Sponger is coming up as medicine number 7, just here. It's not appearing at all in his recommendation, because based on these symptoms, even though Sponger's in those rubrics, we can see it's all in first grade. If we look below Sponger, these are all first grade symptoms in some of the larger rubrics of the case. So he's saying if Sponger's not particularly characteristic of these symptoms, he wouldn't focus his attention on Sponger. He'd be more interested in focusing it on carcinosin or tuberculinum or some of those other symptoms that we looked at. So I'll go back here. Also below here, there's 3 columns where he breaks it down according to the size of the medicines in terms of how well known or how many rubrics it's represented in. So I can see in the very large remedies, using the formula that the Vithoulkas expert system uses, lycopodium's coming up first, followed by carc, followed by staph, followed by phos, sepia, tarantula, arsenicum, sulfur, tuberculinum, etc. So it's given me a grade scale across here. My medium medicines, I've got pituitary anterior, lepi, anthri, back, etc. And my small medicines, I've got a couple. There's a couple there I've never even heard of before. But he's saying these are the ones you'd want to pay attention to out of the small medicines. So what this does is breaks it down and gives you a chance to go, well, I can see he's giving me all these suggestions, which are really polycrest medicines. There's nothing particularly small or unique or out of the ordinary in the medicines he's suggesting, other than he's limited some of those medicines out and said he really wouldn't consider them. but then I could go through my list and go, well, if none of these are fitting, I don't think these really fit the case, maybe I want to go read the Materia Medica in a bit more detail for some of the medium or the smaller size medicines. Over here on the right hand side, you can see it lists for the medicine you're looking at currently the rubrics it belongs to and the grading of the medicine in those rubrics. So because over here under large remedies, the first medicine, lycopodium, is currently highlighted, this information on the right here all pertains to lycopodium. So it's saying that these are the rubrics of your case that have got lycopodium. So I can see mine for dark, it's in blue italics, which is in my repertory blue italics is the second grade symptoms. So this means that lycopodium is in second grade in this symptom. So under the repertory column you can see it's also in Act 2 for second grade. In my patient it was a first grade symptom. I gave it the intensity of 1. Mild anxiety morning, lycopodium, it's also second grade. In my patient it says second grade symptom. I said it was frequent and intense. My name and children, it's also second grade. It says first grade in my patient. Desire for chocolate, second grade in the repertory, third grade in my patient. And extremities pain in the morning, first grade in each. Below this I can see rubrics without lycopodium. So these are the rubrics in my case that lycopodium doesn't appear in. So it doesn't appear under desired salt, and it doesn't appear under extremities pain, cold air aggravates. If I move to a different medicine and clicked on that, let's click on Lepi. So I can see Lepi is in the rubric Generals, Food and Drinks, Chocolate Desire. It's only in first grade, but it's been given a bit more prominence because I've told that in told the module that in my analysis this is a third grade, it's very strong, very frequent symptom in my patient. So it's bumped up the priority and given a bit more weighting to this than what it would ordinarily get. And I can see now it doesn't belong to any of those other rubrics in the case. So you can move through and click on each medicine and see a list of the symptoms that it does and doesn't belong to, or what their grading is and how that relates to your patient. You can actually change and customize the way this window works if you want to work with or deal with gift-free information. You can see across the top here there's a number of buttons we can click. These are all in the top right-hand corner. So clicking on these will customize and change the information. So if I can see this first one, a little clipboard with a green tick, so if I rest my mouse on it, up comes the tooltip. This is to show the rubrics containing the selected remedy. So that's that box at the top here showing all the rubrics this medicine belongs to. So I can turn that on and off and display it or not according to what I want to see. So if I click it, it goes away, and I just see the rubrics that it doesn't have. Click it again, it comes back again. The next one is exactly the same, but for the rubrics without. So in this case I could click it, and it will get rid of those rubrics without tarantula. Click it again to bring them back again. A really useful feature I really quite like is there's also this keynote button here, which brings up the radar keynotes. So I click that, and you'll see it brings up the keynotes for the current medicine down the bottom, Tarantula hispanica. If I change back to lycopodium, it'll bring up lycopodium. So these are the radar keynotes. They're written by Eric Van Woensel. Eric Van Woensel works very closely with George Vithoulkas. You may have seen he's got a really wonderful case-taking book that came out recently, which has got a whole case analysis book, I should say. It's got dozens and dozens of his cases and how he's analysed them using the techniques that George teaches in the school and which really Eric teaches now to George's students at that school. Eric wrote this with a particular understanding and the same approach to homeopathy that Vithoulkas uses, so it's really complementary to what happens in the Vithoulkas expert system. So you could go into there, have a look through that information, and it might help you to jog your memory about what those medicines are about. I'll turn that again off again. You can also change the display a little bit just in terms of how much detail you want to see. So do you want to see all 3 lists of medicines here, or just 2? I could say just 2 if I want a bit more space. Maybe I always want to have the keynotes up or something like that. And you can see a column with the large remedies or the column with the medium and small ones combined together. Or I can separate the medium and small ones out if I want to. You can access all these same details, of course, in the preferences section as well. You can edit how things appear for you. And there's the help file here. So I can click on the help. And this will bring up the help section for the Vithoulkas expert system. So you can go back there if you want to refresh your memory. What were the intensities, what were the classifications for that, how many rubrics of different types should I be including, you can click here and go through this particular section, and there's all the explanatory text and pictures here on how to use the Vithoulkas expert system. Just a question from Caroline just saying, what is Eric's surname? It's Eric Van, V-A-N, Woensel, W-O-E-N-S-E-L. Eric Van Woensel. His new book out is called Classical Homeopathy. It's a series of cases and his analysis of them working with similar methodology to what the Vithoulkas expert system is based on. It's a real teacher of George's method. If you're thinking of a specific medicine, you've got a search field at the top here. So I can say, find sepia, and it will take the highlight to sepia in my analysis, same as you would in your regular analysis. And the other thing across the top here, you can see limit your analysis to a view. Remember at the start when we were talking about the repertory, and in the repertory itself there were the different views available. As you can see in the Vithoulkas expert system, by default it takes you into the Vithoulkas view. This is the one that was built and designed to work with the Vithoulkas expert system. If you want to, you can change that. You could change to Kent and Vithoulkas, or you could go to the full repertory if you're happy to use more experimental information than what George likes to use. You could pick one of the views that limits yourself to animal medicines if you want to. There's all the different options that are there. The Vithoulkas view is set as the default, and of course that's the one that the module is designed to work with and works best with. So that's the default setting. If you want to change that to work with something else, you can do that also. Okay. And I think that's most of what I want to show you. Oh no, this is what I want to show you. I do want to show you something else, sorry. In this list of medicines here, you can also, these are contextual buttons. So I could go to Lycopodium, for example, and do a right click on that, and that comes some options for me, including search for this remedy in which case I can do a search through all my information here and say, I want to search for this in all the Materia Medica, or I want to find the provings, those usual searches you would do, same as you would in any other search window. So for example, search in all open references. I've just got the one open at the moment. I can click that, and that brings up the Lycopodium section in this is Vermeulen's Concordant, because that's the reference that I was working with at the moment. So to go back to my best module, I just go back to the tab by clicking at the top across here. So I'll just show you again how I got to that. So I just went to where it says Lycopodium in my graph, and I right-clicked on that with my mouse. Command click if you're a Mac person, or two-finger click. Search for this remedy in, and then I can go through and say what I'm looking for here. You could also go to George Vithoulkas' books online here and search the information he's got published about that medicine on his website. Let's click it and see what comes up. Okay, he's not got anything about Lycopodium on there. He's got quite a lot about some other medicines though, so you could click through and have a look at that. The other thing you can get through from here, of course, is the information on the remedy. This is a standard window in Opus for finding more information about a particular medicine. I click here and say, bring me up the information on Lycopodium. This will bring me up the Lycopodium remedy information window with those same keynotes, the radar keynotes written by Eric Van Woensel, but also the family information, passport information from Friends of Vermeulen, the multimedia, image files, etc. And all the links to the online resources, Googles and Wikipedias and taxonomical databases and provings.com and all those different resources. And again, the same search feature. You can go and search in the repertories and the Materia Medica for more information about that. So it works very similar to what the regular analysis does in terms of whatever you can see, you can click on and go and find more information that way. But the analysis that's done here is based on Vithoulkas' method. So you can see also, if I just I'll just go to 2 with these graphs here. This is really giving kind of a weighting or a confidence value here on how confident he is that those medicines fit the case. Which is interesting to compare them, because you can see from this kind of list across the top, he puts them in order. But if I compare, say, Lycopodium here to tuberculinum down here, he's probably almost twice as confident in Lycopodium compared to what's in tuberculitis. And this is decided based on how characteristic the medicine is in the rubrics that you've picked, also how represented it is in the repertory and in those particular rubrics, and ultimately the value of the symptoms homeopathically. Are these symptoms that are more useful for characterising a case, or are they symptoms that are less useful for characterising a case? So you can go and click through these and do a whole range of stuff with it. I'm going to clear this and delete this case now because there's something I want to show you specifically just before you go and play with the module yourself. So I'm just going to do a right click on my clipboard, click this clipboard. So one thing with the Vithoulkas expert system, it's designed to work and requires to work with a minimum of 4 rubrics. So you can't do an analysis in the VES without 4 rubrics in your clipboard. If I try to do that, click on the analysis, Vithoulkas expert system, or the Shift F9. You can see it'll bring up a window. Please select at least 4 symptoms to run the VES. But if you want to get into the help section, read that information about the Vithoulkas expert system before you've actually started working on a case, there's a little button here you can click. It says help, which brings up the Vithoulkas help window. So you can go through and read that information that we looked at earlier, which will show you how that module works, and also George's thinking, the type of rubrics you should be picking, the number of them, the way of rating you can use. So I guess the Vithoulkas, the VES is something that I tend to use for probably a majority of my cases. And whatever repertory analysis strategy I'm using, you can always just click the VES. It's just 2 clicks to run through the VES and see if it throws up anything interesting or unusual or something you may not have thought of before. And very often it does, and it's something that I find incredibly useful because it will pop up suggestions that don't come up from a standard flat kind of analysis that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. But if you're working devotedly with that system, of course you're going to get much better results and the best results if you're using the intensity and the grading and the type of rubrics that as recommended. Really, I guess it's a classically oriented Kentian approach to analysis, which George teaches, and what the module is designed to work best with. So you can do that, remember, by using the drop-down in the take button and assigning intensity when you take the rubrics, or with your keyboard, typing this plus, and then just typing in the command after that for the grading that you want to give it, 1, 2, 3, or a 4. In Opus, you can use different grading. You could use grading 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever you want to. But the VES is designed to work with grades 1 through 4, so they're the grades you should be using if you're intending to do a VES analysis. The other thing that perhaps I should show you quickly, if we said and go from contradiction just as a rubric to take, another thing you can do, and I'm going to bring this up, I'll type the plus symbol to show you how to get to do this way doing the plus. So in these take commands, under the options, you've also got the option here to say this is a causative rubric. So this, if the rubric you've picked is an etiology rubric, maybe it's an ailments from rubric, or even a non-ailments from rubric, but in your case this is the etiology, you can go into here and actually mark this and identify to the VES that it's a causation rubric, and it will factor that into the analysis and give more weighting to those medicines and pay attention to them as a specific causation symptom. That's another thing that's useful to do, is to consider it as a causation rubric when it's there. The VES doesn't use elimination rubrics. So if you've got your rubric, your repertorization limited to a particular rubric, the VES won't consider that. It will actually unlimit it in the analysis because George recommends not using that methodology because it's not necessary in the VES. You don't need to limit it to a particular rubric because the idea of limiting to a particular rubric is trying to focus on what's more characteristic, and of course VES has got its own mathematical formulas built in and its own approach built in to focus on what's characteristic according to his methodology. So these ones, the rubric of course will still be there, it still gets considered, just doesn't get used as an elimination, but you can use it as causation rubric, which is a specific tool for the VES. The other way to get to that, if you're a keyboard person, is by clicking on the F6 button. The F6 brings up those more advanced take options. If you want to use them rather than doing the plus and having to click that button, you can just type F6. Okay. Alright, so that's about what I want to show you guys today. Has anyone else got any other questions about the Vithoulkas expert system? Just type them into the questions box if there's something that you'd like me to say again, or something you'd like to ask more about. Here's just saying, how did you get there? What did you click on? So on my keyboard, you can, to bring up the quick command, it's just the plus symbol, the shift plus. I'll just go back into my repertory, like that. Or I could type the function button F6, and that brings up the more advanced take options. If you're on a Mac, it depends on if you've got your function buttons set to work as function buttons or not. On Windows, function buttons always work as function buttons. On Mac, they've got two versions, so it's an option in your preferences whether they're set to work as function buttons or not. So if you're on a Mac and you click F6, and in I'm trying to remember what the alternate button says. Let's try this. See? Oh, here we go. It changes tabs. Okay, that's because you've got different function setting there on your keyboard, so you can change that in your preferences. Okay, anyone else got any questions? No? Okay, alright, great, that's good. I'll consider that we've covered all that information then. Oh, here's one. Beautiful. Peter say, any repercussions for Windows 8? We don't know yet, mate. Windows 8 beta testing versions are still coming through, so until the release candidate comes out, we won't have tested. We don't expecting to see any issues with Windows 8, but until it actually comes out, we don't know. So when it comes out, the programmers will look at it and update things. The same for Mac users, Mountain Lion's just been released. So what we suggest is hold back updating to Mountain Lion and Windows 8 until the programmers have tested their compatibility. I'm working on Mountain Lion today, but I know some other people have needed some updates before they could do that. So I'd wait for the next update to upgrade. And same for Windows folks. Windows 8 I think is coming out October, November, something like that. We get the release candidate very shortly before you do, or sometimes the same day that you do, but we're testing on beta versions before that. Things look okay at the moment, but yeah, ask me before you install, before you update, and I'll let you know where it's at when we're close to the release date. Okay, all right, beautiful. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Wish you all the best. And I have recorded today, so I'll get that online and post it out to you very shortly in case you want to watch it again. All right, take care, guys. Thanks so much for coming.